Welcome everybody to this event, this launching event of the Palestine-Israel Journal in cooperation with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. My name is Hannes Alpen. I'm directing the work of Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Palestine. A very warm welcome to all our guests from Israel, Palestine, and I heard we also have guests from the US joining us right now. The Friedrich Ebert Foundation is a social democratic foundation based in more than 100 countries in the world and also in Palestine. We have our office here in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. Sheikh Jarrah has become a symbol, I believe, worldwide for the Palestinian struggle for equality and rights of self-determination. This will be part of our discussion, obviously, later on. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary as a foundation. Our cooperation with the Palestine-Israel Journal also goes way back into the 90s. And the journal has been carried by a generation of peace activists of the 90s until today. And we thought it's overdue that we listen to the voices of young peace activists. And the Palestine-Israel Journal came up with this edition, The New Generation, The Hope for Change. I would have put a question mark to this. Maybe others want to put an exclamation mark to this. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today. But first of all, I would like to hand over to the co-editor of the journal, Hillel Schenker, for some welcoming words. Please, Hillel, the floor is yours. Hillel, you are on mute.
Okay. Once again, I'd like to invite everybody who is watching to this Zoom launch of our special issue of the Palestine-Israel Journal, the only joint Israeli-Palestinian publication. I am the Israeli co-editor who is speaking to you from Tel Aviv, and our Palestinian co-editor, Ziad Abu Ziad, will join us later from Azariah in the West Bank. We are very proud to have created this special issue on the younger generation, and I just wanted to read a quotation from the introductory editorial, which as follows. This issue of the Palestine-Israel Journal is devoted to analyzing the situation of the younger generation in both societies and to providing a platform for the younger generation from Israel, Palestine, and around the world to express themselves and speak loudly about their problems, fears, aspirations, and future prospects. While they can and should learn from both the achievements and the failures of the older generation, as Hannes said, we essentially, since the 90s, the older generation are the ones who created and have maintained the journal. But youth are the key to the future, as I continue the editorial. In their hands lies the hope for the development of new strategies to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the sake of both peoples. We have here 3 young Israelis and 3 young Palestinians who will hopefully shed light on their own circumstances, their hopes, and their plans. And I pass it now back to Hannes Alpen to moderate the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hillel. Now, in preparation for this session, we have discussed a lot how to conduct this. And after the recent events in the last couple of weeks, I think we maybe have more questions than answers. And we certainly felt the need that there is a need to talk but even a bigger need to listen. This is why we're trying kind of an experiment today. We have six young Palestinians and Israelis speaking to us today. And my idea is that this will be more of a platform for every one of these young activists who speak on their own behalf, but who also hold very important positions in peace organizations, and can maybe shed a little bit of light in the work that they do. I would say we always consider the younger generation as something that would bring about change and something that could maybe reignite some hope for a better future. On the other hand, I think we have seen some quite pessimistic trends. There have been studies that have shown that the younger generation in Israel actually is more right-wing than the older generation. Maybe also because the older generation had much more chance to be in actual contact with Palestinians, and the younger generation ever since the Second Intifada actually had very little contact with Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza. And on the Palestinian side, the youth is very much frustrated, and unfortunately, after the last round of escalation, we even have seen also in public opinion polls the support for violence as a concept in order to fight for Palestinian rights. And these are, I think, very worrying trends, together with the amount of criticism that we have seen, not only for peace activism, but also for the concept of the two-state solution. There is a lot of criticism, especially in Palestine, concerning the failure of Oslo, concerning the failure of the concept of dialogue and cooperation. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Hamas, in the eyes of many Palestinians, actually managed to portray themselves as the only power by using violence that can remind Israelis of the fact that there is indeed a problem. And these are very worrying trends, and I hope actually that some of the young Palestinians and Israelis that will be speaking to us today will help me regain some confidence in a better future. And I probably won't have time to introduce every one of them. That's why we have prepared short bios that we'll put into the chat or in the comment section on Facebook. So you can later on Google these names or link up with their organizations. And I would like to start with Nivine Sandouka, who works currently for a German NGO, but has also her own NGO in Jerusalem. She's a Jerusalemite from Beit Hanina. And where better to start than in Jerusalem, where we have seen the protests and ongoing protests actually here in close proximity to our office in Sheikh Jarrah. Nivine, the floor is yours. I would like to ask you to maybe shortly present yourself and your work, and what are your key thoughts now after what we've seen in the recent weeks?
Yeah.
Thank you, Nivine. The floor is yours.
Very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for having this opportunity to speak. So as you said, I'm a Palestinian. I live in Beit Hanina, which is also in close proximity of Sheikh Jarrah, and I work for a German association, but I also feel a part of my obligation as a young woman to give back to my community, especially in Jerusalem. As a young woman as well, the situation which we face on a daily basis paves the way for us to be more active in this way, in a non-violent manner, to regain our rights. And that said, that is, as you mentioned, why I manage another local initiative called Our Rights, حقوقنا, which focuses on political and civil rights of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, especially around representation of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. And let's try to, I think, to answer your question, let's try to understand the context in which the young people live in Jerusalem. Well, first of all, Palestinian youth living in the eastern side of the city, the occupied of the city, are living in extremely difficult conditions. We're talking about 70% poverty rate. We're talking about politically, there is no political activism. If they want to have any kind of political activism or representation, it is going to be suppressed by the Israeli system, including, of course, the Israeli police, when I say system. And of course, we're also seeing almost daily clashes with the Israeli police. There is constantly heavy Israeli forces presence in the eastern side of the city, so which kind of provokes as well the Palestinian youth all the time. So there's like what happened during the last escalation was kind of not new. It was a different level, yes, but if you actually looked a little bit back, you will always find that there were clashes happening between Palestinian youth and Israeli forces as well. Now, not to mention also that Palestinian youth face detention and imprisonment at a very early age, as young as 12 years old, they are being imprisoned. Now, looking at a little bit the wider context, they are residents, they are not civilians. They're citizens, I mean, sorry, so they are civilians. They are not they are not citizens of the state. When you are a resident, it means that you are constantly under the threat that your residency is going to be provoked and you're going to lose your right to live in your own city, basically. So you cannot, for example, live outside of Jerusalem. Sometimes it also puts restrictions on a sense of whom you marry or you don't marry. You cannot, as a Palestinian, marry, for example, a person from the West Bank, because then you will have a problem with the unification of your family. It's different legal statuses, let us say. And at the same time, we are seeing these young men and women who also witness that their older generation, their parents, are unable to protect them as well. And they are disconnected from the Palestinian Authority. Now, putting all of this in a mixture, and of course there's other many circumstances, but putting all of these circumstances together, what we witness a new identity that is emerging, a new identity of, yes, it is linked to the Palestinian narrative, but it is also a very Jerusalem unique identity. It is linked to preserving the sumud or steadfastness of the Palestinians in Jerusalem. They don't have anybody to protect them. They need to protect this identity themselves. And at the same time, they look at themselves as the protectors of Al-Aqsa compound. So if we look throughout the years, even I remember it was in 2017, and correct me if I'm wrong, the clashes, I wouldn't call them clashes, they were actually peaceful demonstrations and sit-ins, also were triggered by Al-Aqsa Mosque. The same thing that is happening today. It is also triggered by Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, the holiest month for Muslims. So kind of like this identity to protect Al-Aqsa is a very unique Jerusalem identity. And now with trying to uproot the Palestinians and displace them again from Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, not only does it trigger that identity that we are the protectors of Jerusalem and we need to stay, but it also triggers another identity. Never again is the slogan which I think Palestinians also are carrying within us. It's never again to the Nakba, never again to becoming refugees again. So all these factors came together to create the situation that we witnessed today.
Thank you very much, Nivine. After these short rounds of introduction, we will engage in a conversation amongst you guys. So you will have the opportunity to speak again. I would also like to hear then later from you what gives you hope. Because I think we've seen that this whole finding of one's identity is also connected to maybe a new hope amongst youth. Sadly, what we've seen during the recent round of escalation was ethnic violence between Jews and Palestinians inside Israel. And we have with us Sally Abed, who is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, and in the leadership of a movement called Standing Together, Omdim Beyachad, who is fighting for social issues together, Palestinians and Jewish Israelis. Sally, you want to join us, present yourselves and your thoughts.
Of course. Thank you for having me. And what a great panel. It really is very great. And I'm sorry that I might not stay here until the end to talk about hope. So I might add it right now because we do talk a lot about hope. My name is Sally Abed. I am a Palestinian activist. I'm also part of the elected leadership at Standing Together. We are actually the largest Arab Jewish grassroots in Israel. We organize and mobilize people locally through local chapters and on campuses, as well as nationally around catalyzing issues of peace, equality, and social justice. The idea is that we see the interconnectedness between the struggles for peace and ending the occupation and a just peace for the Palestinians and for the Israelis, as well as equality and social justice within the society in Israel. So we do organize people who live in Israel, Palestinians and Jewish citizens. So I'm going to really paint maybe just a brief picture of what Palestinian youth face in Israel. If you look at the latest surveys, 40% of these youth who is considered youth are considered unoccupied. What does that mean? It means that they have no professional, social, or academic framework. 40% of youth, of Palestinian youth in Israel, do not have any framework. They have basically nothing to do in their lives, which really can be translated into poverty, and it can come from poverty. It really is a cycle, and one of the largest things that it really translates to is organized crime and illegal activities. We see that there is a pandemic within the Palestinian community in Israel with very, very, very high rates of crime, of illegal activities, of drug dealing, and organized crime. This is something that we are facing as a society, and of course, it's not something that we are able to receive any kind of solution or any kind of cooperation or proper collaboration from the police or from the government, the Israeli government, to really attend to this issue. That's an issue, but it's very, very important to really portray that, because I think it's really very often about this kind of pandemic, the crime pandemic that we are experiencing in Arab Palestinian towns in Israel. Now, let's really talk a little bit about Palestinian youth in mixed cities. Where we are talking about, which is a story that really has been told more recently. Sheikh Jarrah is, of course, a very different story, but we see a lot of these evacuations and a lot of, I also would call it an ethnic cleansing, or a minimization of Palestinian presence in mixed cities through that Judaization of the cities. they experience provocations, very systematic racism, poverty, incitement, and more. These kids, I live in Jaffa, so I really see a lot of kids that experience, that come from very, very marginalized community, very poor houses, who are at the threat of eviction from public housing that they were giving to after 48. And basically, we are seeing a lot of, Judaization process, which really affects the city and affects the experience of the youth in that city. We also have youth in Palestinian towns that are facing many obstacles. A lot of them are going outside, studying, getting, trained, getting their degree, and then coming back. And that's happening increasingly. Yes, we have more and more and more youth. We have very contradicting patterns of unemployment and crime, and then we have another pattern of really increasing. We have a lot of youth who are going and getting educated and really assimilating more into the Israeli society. With that being said, they come back to their towns, and they cannot absorb, towns that cannot absorb their skills, towns that don't have, it cannot absorb their academic training. It cannot really provide them or their future kids or their families a proper framework to run a prosperous life like they see it. A lot of them also obviously face the fact that they don't have land to build in, because Israel is not expanding the cities or the towns plans, residential plans. So they find themselves finding an apartment in a Jewish town nearby. These towns that now have practically became mixed cities, however, they do not offer, and in fact refuse to offer, and it's very, very legally backed now by the nation state law, to offer any type of frameworks, Arab-speaking frameworks, schools, after hour activities for these kids and their families. So we live in a place that a lot of people talk about, what kind of racism we're having, and it's very hard to really describe. It's like, oh, do you experience racism as a Palestinian? I'm like, well, our space to exist as Palestinians is almost non-existent. Our space to exist as Arabs is limited, kind of existent. And it's a very conditional partnership. It's a very conditional citizenship that we have. And that really takes me to the very, very important point that we have a mobilization. We have an awakening. Our youth are really, and we really saw this in the last few months, that our youth in Israel, our Palestinian youth who live in Israel, have this kind of awakening, and they are demanding acknowledgement. They are demanding, solutions, and they're not demanding improvements. They're not demanding, policy changes. We want acknowledgement of our narrative. We want a liberation of our narrative, which is an essential step to the liberation of our people. And that's an opportunity that I don't think was there before, in a sense that our ability, our capacity to mobilize and organize right now, especially with social media, especially that we are more educated, especially that we speak Hebrew, especially that we are more skilled and trained to do things. And that comes in parallel to a shared society, a Jewish-Arab shared society that has also developed. If we look at the reactions of the last month, it was a kind of reaction that was unprecedented. If the amount of violence that happened in Israel among Palestinians and Jews in Israel, and the attacks and the aggression on Gaza, to be able to mobilize tens of thousands of people, in hundreds of places in Israel, and mobilize, huge rallies to end the occupation and for peace during these very, very polarizing times, that was something that was not possible a couple of years ago. And that really is a testimony to the developing ability of the shared society to really mobilize and change the narrative. Now, we're not naive. most of that shared society still is stuck with the old narrative of, Arab-Jewish partnership, and really disconnecting our narrative as Palestinians here in Israel to the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, the refugees. We are Arabs, you're our Arabs, it's easy, we can understand it. We don't want to really connect you to the others, and we are demanding that connection. And I do think that the Israeli left is having that kind of challenge, but we're not here to talk about the challenges of the Israeli left. Maybe I'll leave that to Donna. So that's really the challenge for us right now, is really to be able to create a space, a political space, a social space, a cultural space for Palestinians youth here to create a Palestinian democratic pluralistic narrative, because we never had that chance before. We don't have that narrative. Even within, when I talk, I'm one of the most prominent, shared society, Arab-Jewish partnership, and it was very, very hard for me to, wave the flag of partnership during these times, because I crave acknowledgement, and I don't get it often, even within the best of partnerships. And we need that space to create that space. And I think it's also the responsibility of the shared society in Israel, which is something that we're starting to realize, to create that kind of narrative that will go in parallel alongside developing shared society, so we can actually reach a more leveled conversation, and not that coexistence or that narrative or the dialogue that we have been talking about for so long, that really hasn't worked for like 3 decades almost now. So I'm going to stop here now. Oh, I did say, do I have time to talk about hope in case I don't have time? It's okay if not.
And our whole office was cut off, and I'm joining you now actually through mobile connection. So you got a extra few minutes because of that. But I wanted to remind you that you promised us hope, and I would like you to speak a little bit more about that. And I mean, your organization has seen quite some traction, right? Like almost no other shared society project. You have got a lot of support, not only in the communities, but also from the media. And maybe this is in itself is a sign of hope. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about.
Of course. Dmitry Chomsky, he's a populist, a historian in the Hebrew University. He actually wrote an article at Haaretz last month, which basically said that no conflict over territory in the modern history of humanity has managed to create a grassroots movement that can incorporate both two narratives that are conflicting. And at Standing Together, we actually are starting to do that. And if you look at the studies of which is really unprecedented, the fact that we were able to incorporate and really not only embrace, insist on providing, on putting on the table the Palestinian narrative as something that is not simply, the Palestinian youth are not only talking about, liberation and peace and security are really obviously the one major, it's the one major thing that we can have, but we cannot have that without having, a just and equal society. We also cannot have a just and equal society without ending the occupation and liberating the Palestinian people. And that's something that, it's an essential understanding and an essential story to tell the Jewish youth. And it's something that is very, very, it can be very effective in a sense that up until now, we were able to, me as a Palestinian in Israel, I was only being able to be an activist as a Palestinian to end the occupation, or as an Arab, as a victim of systematic discrimination, and nothing else. I have other things that I want to do. I have other things that I want to advance. And that's very, very empowering. For the Jewish youth, it's also changing the conversation from, the occupation is, you need to end the occupation as Jewish people because it's bad and it's immoral, to you will never enjoy a just and equal society in Israel without ending the occupation. The same system that's maintaining the occupation is the same system that's maintaining the inequality in Israel and keeping you poor. It's the same system that is maintaining, polluting economy and polluting, corporations that, and really worsening climate crisis. It's the same system that is maintaining gender inequality and economic inequalities, and the peripheries are poor. And it really is very, very connected. And when you talk to people through creating real struggles that they really can talk to, we have shared struggles and shared interests to advance these things and see the interconnectedness with them. And we are methodologically organizing people. We are training people. We are creating a DNA, a very deep DNA amongst, Palestinian and Israeli youth in Israel that understand this interconnectedness and understand this relation. And if we are able to create a joint collective action towards social change among Palestinians and Israelis in Israel, that's amazing. That means that we have a model of how we can create that joint collective action as Palestinians and Israelis as a whole. And I think that is that's for me, that's the biggest source of hope, to be able to organize people that way.
Thank you, Sally. If I understand you correctly, you're not only taking on the occupation, but you're taking on gender justice and social inequalities all at once.
All of it. We are running the Green New Deal in Israel. We are running, during the pandemic, we organized thousands of people around income security, Arabs and Jews in Israel. We organize people around gender inequalities, around LGBTQ rights, which is something that is never talked about within the Palestinian narrative, and it is something that does need to be developed as a pluralistic, democratic, socially just, conscientious narrative. You cannot disconnect these. Bomb here, I'm not sure, but it's something that we see the interconnect.
Thank you, Sally, so much. I certainly agree with you.
You're cutting off. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Is it just me, or
I
is he
certainly
cutting
agree
off?
with some.
I can hear you.
I will just I will try to switch back to our office's internet after this. But Sally, I certainly agree with you that some struggles, you can't disconnect them from other struggles. Just as we consider the fight for social equality be separable from the fight for gender justice. We don't believe there can be a social justice without gender justice. And it is not without reason that we had the first two speakers being women today.
It didn't go unnoticed.
This is very much on purpose. However, Sally, I would like to now give the stage to our next speaker. For now, Jonathan Kabiri, who's the director of Seeds for Peace in Israel. He has joined Seeds for Peace back in 2011, and he has been active in the field of social activism in various organizations before. Jonathan, do you want to share with us your thoughts?
Yes. Hey, everyone. Nice to see you. It's hard to talk after Sally. I feel like
nothing I could say that would match it. So thank you, Sally, for the hope. I'm Jonathan. I'm working for Seeds of Peace in Israel. And I went to Seeds of Peace first. Seeds of Peace is an organization founded in 1993 that brought together Israelis and Palestinians among Egyptians and Jordanians and people from other conflicted regions around the world to dialogue about their conflict in a summer camp in Maine. Peace have done that in the past 28 years until COVID. And I joined Seeds of Peace as a 16 years old Israeli that was mostly excited for the opportunity to go to the US for the first time and couldn't care less about the conflict. And for me, it really changed things. I educated myself about the conflict. I got to hear people. And for me and for many others, 7,300 alums of Seeds of Peace throughout the years, it remained a romantic experience of good memories, of good dialogue that took place. Definitely a transitional experience. People have changed significantly, but the reality didn't. And I think nowadays, after three decades of such work of Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, those alums of those programs of the 90s are growing up and saying that it wasn't enough. It was good, it was great. It helped us grow as human beings, as activists, as Israelis, as Palestinians, but it wasn't enough. And thinking about the hope that Sally offered and the hope that we aspire to offer our participants in those kind of programs. Sorry for the buzzkill, but hope is important, but let's not sell false hope. We need to remain realistic and to read the reality as it is, and to bring Israelis and Palestinians into the conversation, into a real conversation, not not a show of a photo of Israelis and Palestinians talking. So we need to be careful not to sell false hope, but also we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the new generation, the next generation, not this one, the next one is something completely different. Those kids had learned everything they know about the world from the smartphone. They're more connected and more with more access to knowledge and information than ever before, but also with no access almost at all to things that are out of their bubble. So when I think of this next Israeli generation of Jewish Israeli kids, they hear nothing about the conflict. They know almost nothing about the conflict, except of occasionally hearing that the Hadid sisters are pro-Palestinians. That's something. It's not nothing, but also it doesn't serve the purpose of having everyone informed and in the conversation of what's happening in their lives and what's happening where they live and what is done on behalf of them. I think we should maybe not give up the hope, but still be very, very cautious and aware of the new generation that we're going to work with, not sell them false hope, but actually use the different elements of life that they bring with them to change, shift the conversation, shift how dialogue looks like, how Israeli-Palestinian dialogue looks like, and most specifically how it ends, or with what it ends. So if it ends up with Palestinians going back to Palestine to live the occupation and nothing changed, and Israelis are going back and are not delivering the message, and it's kept a romantic nostalgia, then it's not enough. We need to do more. That's my point. And I will say that even if it's not comfortable, and even if it's not us who are here who are gonna do more, the next generation will. They'll do more, and we gotta step up and be there for them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for this reminder and for this for these serious words. As I said in my introduction, also the whole peace movement is constantly facing the criticism that it is serving as a fig leaf to the current ones in power and to a situation of people who don't really want to bring about change. So thank you very much of reminding us of the fact. But you also said that peace activists should work with the new generation and take them seriously. And someone who really does and who actually digs really deep into the conscious and the subconscious of two troubled people is Elias, Executive Director of the Holy Land Trust. The Holy Land Trust that does a lot of trauma work, a lot of healing work, a lot of connecting Israelis and Palestinians. And this work sometimes it's seen as naive in times of conflict, but I believe it's more needed than ever. And Elias, I want to give you the floor and tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thank you. So I introduce myself always as I am an Arab Palestinian Christian living in this land. Sometimes sound confusing for most international, but I identify myself as an indigenous Jew. That my blood is a Jewish blood that converted to Christianity 2,000 years ago. So my connection with this land is back to thousands of years. As a Palestinian living in the West Bank, I have witnessed what is called the Israeli military occupation since my childhood. Since I was 6 years old, I was witnessing the Israeli military occupation and operation during the first Intifada, seeing violence. My father was arrested for being involved in the civil disobedience in the movement in Bet Sahur in my town, that my people refused to pay tax for the Israeli government in that time because we did not have an equal right in social justice. I have witnessed all these kind of activities, demonstrations and violence that gave me a lot of question, that actually left a lot of question in myself, like what is happening around and who are these people that we're fighting with, and why is all this kind of violence, and why as a Palestinian child I don't have the same right as any other children in the world, that we are not allowed to travel freely, going to the beach every Sunday or whatever. So when Oslo came in 1993, this was like a huge hope for me as a Palestinian. I don't know, I was 12 years in that time, 12, 13. So I saw that hope is coming and that we will have an independent state and we will have a full right as any other child in the world, that we can travel, there is no demonstration, there is no Israeli occupation, there is no military in the street. What happened in just few years after the Oslo was a huge shift in the reality, that we find out that the peace agreement is not fulfilling the needs of the local community, that there was a huge failure from our governments, from our leaders, that they are not fulfilling the needs of the local community. So I joined Holy Land Trust after my graduation, 2007. Actually, I joined Holy Land Trust organization, because in that time Holy Land Trust was dealing with dealing with the challenges on the ground, like how can we create a shared vision for the future, and what kind of peace, what kind of solution we are looking for as an Israeli and Palestinian for the future. We have been trying nonviolence, we have been trying the violence action, but nothing is working. The peace agreement is not working. So we, as an organization, we are trying to find the roots of the violence, where this violence and hatred comes from, and what is the reason behind these violence, like why we are just not living together, why we are not just sharing the land equally, why we are not having a social justice, why we don't have any, any equal right as a Palestinian and Israeli, as a Jewish, as a Christian, as a Muslim. Everybody in this land call this land holy. Doesn't matter, you are a religion, you are an atheist, you are whatever, you can identify yourself. We all believe that this land is a holy land, and this was given to Abraham and his children. It doesn't matter what your belief system is, but we have a spiritual connection with this land. And how can we, as a local community, to trust and to be the trustees of this land, and how can we create a shared vision for the future away from any political agenda that can give equal right, justice to every single person living in this land. So we as an organization, we believe and we adopted the nonviolence philosophy and nonviolence method, that we promote nonviolence as the main tool for resistance for your rights, for fighting for your right. Nonviolence is the only way. We do not believe in any violence action. So we promote nonviolence through trainings and activities to the local Palestinian community. And we are one of the first organizations that we started the nonviolence demonstrations in Bethlehem in the second Intifada, in the middle of the violent period. And we've been criticized by several groups that nonviolence is not the answer. But now we can see that there is a huge shift in the Palestinian community and the leaders, that they are adopting the nonviolence as a way of resisting. The second field that we focus on is leadership. That we are lacking for a leadership that can carry the needs of the local communities and shape it into a solution for the future. Our leaders are busy in designing the peace agreement according to political agendas and economical agreements. This is all what we got from Oslo, dividing the land, separating the land between categories, making business agreements, and this is not actually what the local community needs. There is a lot of needs for each community, for each individual who are living here. You were talking about, Sally, about social justice. We are also talking about environmental justice. Like, we are sharing the same land, we are drinking from the same water, we are breathing the same air. So any environmental issue is affecting both sides. So I have to be aware of that environmental justice. Like, if my water is polluted, then your water is polluted. So we have responsibilities. We are sharing the same land, the same resources. So we need to think jointly what kind of peace agreement and what kind of vision that we are looking for the future, in a way to live together equally and without any conflict. It doesn't matter what kind of political solution. We can talk about 15 states, not 2 states. We can talk about 15 states in this land, but it's not matter what kind of solution. It's what is the needs of the local community to live in equal right, to have their full needs, freedom of movement, freedom of worship. So we are also been searching and digging a lot in what causes the violence and the hatred between the Israeli and the Palestinian. And we found out that we are both traumatized. As a Palestinian, I have been, as I said before, I have been witnessing the Israeli military occupation I've been traumatized by the Israeli military, by the Israeli Jewish military. So for me, every symbol of Judaism reminds me with the occupation. The kippah is a reminder of the occupation, the menorah, the Israeli flag, the Hebrew language. All these symbols reminds me with the occupation as a Palestinian. And at the same time, if you look at the Israelis, they are traumatized as well, and they carry a lot of fear from what happened in the past in Europe, that they feel insecure, they feel everybody's attacking them, and they feel that there is a threat of a new Holocaust is coming. So they see the Arabs, they see the Palestinian, that we are the new threat. So there is lack of trust between Palestinian and Israeli. What happened in 1948, it was a shift in the relationship between the Jews and the Palestinian, that we lost our trust. Fear is controlling us, and fear is the motivator for violence. So we are focusing now on how can we heal on a collective level and on a personal level, and then in a collective level, healing the fear and the trauma that we inherited from our past, and how can we honor the past, respect the past, but do not stuck in the past. We need to see the future based on the possibility that we have today. And this is the non-linear leadership that we are, a methodology that we are using in our training, that we as a human, we always judge the future based on our past experience. This can be work, this cannot be work based on our past experience. And this can be implemented as well in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, like we don't have partner for peace. If you ask Israeli and Palestinian, they both answer the same question. We have no partner for peace. We will never have peace in this land because of our past experiences and trauma that lives in our DNA. So what we do is actually bringing Israeli and Palestinian to heal that trauma and fear and hatred, and transfer it into a positive vision for the future, that we can find mutuality, and we can find that there is a lot of things that we can share together in a positive way, that away from political agenda again. And how can we create a new generation, a healed generation, not keep the ongoing fear. And this is what actually the Israeli government are doing. Like they are succeeding, like they succeed to control the Israeli people by feeding the fear, by designing the red signs on area A. Do not cross, do not go there because they will kill you, like it's dangerous for you. So keeping the peace agreement was more about feeding the fear and losing the trust between the Israeli and Palestinian. Like I am as a Palestinian, if I want to go to Tel Aviv, I need to apply for a permit, but for me, it's dangerous to ride in a Jewish buses because I cannot speak Arabic. If I speak Arabic, I'll be in trouble maybe. If an Israeli Jewish come to Bethlehem, it's illegal for him, it's dangerous, and he cannot speak in Hebrew. So this is how the new generation being systemized and programmed in a way that do not trust the others. And our main mission now, how can we rebuild this trust? By healing our traumas and bad habits and bad thoughts into a negative way and into a positive way for the future, that we all have responsibility toward each other, that we can all work together to shape the future that we want, based on nonviolence, healing, and transformation. These are like the three main things. And I personally been transferred, I've been healed, I can say, because in the past I used to fear Saudi Kiba, like flashback on the military occupation, flashback when the Israeli used to come and arrest my father at night. Hearing the Hebrew language sometimes used to scare me. But now, yeah, like I can see I'm healed. I can see in a different eye that I can see the mutuality and the interest in both sides for the better future. So these are the three main category that we are focusing on non-violence, leadership, and healing. And I am also an elected city council in my city, Beit Sahur. I was running for the mayor election 4 years ago, but did not get enough votes. So as I consider myself as well as a young politician, trying to influence my community with these new vision, how even using the term, like I do not accept using the term the Jewish soldier. Sometimes, like we say, like the Jewish soldiers arrested someone. I correct that by Israeli soldiers. And we cannot deny that the occupation is the main obstacle for peace. So what we are trying to work now is creating a core group of Israeli and Palestinian activists to take action to end the Israeli occupation, because the Israeli occupation is the main obstacle for any future peace agreement and decisions. And I believe the Palestinian resistance cannot be completed until we have Israeli activists standing side by the Palestinian to resist the Israeli occupation.
Thank you very much, Elias. This is the perfect bridge to our next speaker, Donna Mills. Let me just say that the idea of a first principle approach, right, looking at what the community's needs are, I think it's very powerful. It's also very fashionable to sort of put whatever solution last and put an analysis of the situation first. Obviously, if you're a Christian from Bethlehem, you want to go to the Sea of Galilee, you need a permit. If you're a Muslim and you want to visit Al-Aqsa, you need a permit. If you're a Jew and you want to go to Hebron, Harid, for religious purposes, you probably need army protection. And all these different needs of the communities are not met in the current reality, and maybe they are also not met in some of the designs of the solution of the future. And I think this is where a lot of thought is put into the needs of the community, maybe a human rights-based approach first, and a solution, sort of whatever the solution, making that only a second step. But now to you, Donna, you have been with Peace Now. So what Elias referred to, there needs to be an alliance together with Jewish Israelis, and I think Peace Now is maybe the one of the most.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for this wonderful panel. I've learned so much, and it's a real honor to hear all of you speaking. So I'll say that I joined Peace Now when I was 13, and I've recently returned to become its external relations director. I very much sympathized with what Nivine said of the honor of serving your community and going back to the place that you really owe your political education. A few words about Peace Now. Peace Now is the oldest and largest peace movement in Israel. It was founded in 1978. It works on 3 levels. First, it works in stakeholder diplomacy, giving briefings to decision makers and providing clear information about the status of the occupation. I'll say something about that in a second. And we also work in legal advocacy, working with Palestinians in danger of eviction, working with Palestinians who are facing settlements every day. Very much relates and sympathize also with what Elias said about the occupation being the biggest and most present obstacle we have to peace at the moment. And we also work as a grassroots movement, and you will often see us in demonstrations and joining other demonstrations and just being presence of the discourse of peace in the region. In the 90s, Peace Now identified settlements as the biggest obstacle to peace and founded Settlement Watch, which is the biggest settlement watchdog in the region. And we compile and provide data about the expansion of settlements, which includes both building, obviously legally, in the West Bank, but also evictions, which the discussion around Sheikh Jarrah is something that we have been involved in for many, many years. And we inform and advocate around. So that's a little bit about what Peace Now does and what we do on a day-to-day basis. I want to respond a little bit. The joy and the challenge of being the last on the panel is that I have a lot of thoughts and responses to things that have been said before me. And I want to come back to a point that Sally made that I really agreed with very, very strongly from a different position, which is that the surges of violence that we saw in the so-called mixed cities, you can think about the history of those cities and how they became mixed and who mixed there and what the relationship were, which I think Standing Together does extraordinary work on. And one thing that we in Peace Now say is that when there is no green line, there is no red line. So a lot of what we see within Palestinian and Israeli communities, we have seen for many years in Peace Now in the occupied West Bank, the kind of over-policing and the kind of lawlessness and lack of accountability, arrests without any explanation and without any reason and without any cause, lack of legal defense. These are things that if you monitor the occupation, you know them very, very intimately and very, very well. And when they happen suddenly within your neighborhood, if people are shocked, it's because they are not aware of other processes that have been going on for many years. I partially agree with Jonathan about the state of the Israeli youth being disconnected, perhaps in parts, and perhaps not being as informed as it should be. Absolutely, there's not enough knowledge about the occupation. That is why we do what we do every day. I was a beneficiary of that education in the 90s, and I feel it's our responsibility to give it to the future generations. I don't think we can blame the future generations for not having this knowledge. I think it's our responsibility to educate. It's our responsibility to change things now. And I don't think we also have the privilege of waiting for the next generation. I say that I always define myself as an Israeli coming from the wrong side of history. And I don't think I have the privilege until things are better, when we can make things even better, and we can't wait until things are more just so that we can find a solution. Things have been bad for a long time. When I joined Peace Now in 1996, things were very bad. I don't think any of us had a great illusion that the solution was imminent and would be happening soon. But that's exactly why it's our obligation to educate and to galvanize and to organize, together with a lot of partners on this call, and together with the ethos that has been shared on this call, towards a solution that is long-lasting and ensures human rights and equality. I very much sympathize with the ethos that has been already vocalized earlier about needing to achieve just peace, and not just peace, but peace that is really ensuring human rights in the process of mitigating what's happening at the moment. And settlement, what it does, it's not only talking about settlements as basically an obstacle for peace. Of course, that is the main line. We see ourselves as the future Peace and Reconciliation Committee. One day, someone will need information about what has happened in all these very long years of occupation, and they will have our records to refer to. But we also think about the everyday. And again, here, I don't think we have the privilege of waiting for the future, because every day, horrible human rights violations are happening through and with the facilitation of the settlements as the most, I would say, explicit signage of the occupation. And we, as Israelis who want a peaceful and a just solution, it is our responsibility to educate and to galvanize against that reality, which is everyday reality for those people we work with, Palestinians we work with across the border. And in Jerusalem, I should say, obviously, it's a very interesting and special case in Jerusalem because there is no border. The executive director of Peace Now, who wrote an essay for this wonderful journal, and congratulations to Hillel and to the editors, because it's really an extraordinary piece of work, I think. Shaked Morag, my boss, says that Jerusalem is the microcosm of the entire conflict. I think there's a lot of truth there. You see a lot of the issues that have kind of erupted in Jerusalem that we've been warning against for a very long time, that have been kind of warning signs in many other locations that have been volatile for the conflict, which is why a lot of our work at the moment is in Jerusalem, although of course Peace Now advocates also in other places around the country. Now I want to say a few things about youth and in defense of youth and in defense of the need to organize for youth, because I don't think it's an empty statement to say that youth are the future. I think it's something that we need to sustain. We need to not give up on hope for the youth, because again, we just don't have that luxury. We can't wait for a decade and say, oh, the next generation has come along and things will be better. Now we have the space to educate, let's do it. And I think a lot of work done by extraordinary people on this call that are educating in the present and that are opening these spaces in which we can have this honest dialogue that might be painful, that might be hard on all sides, but especially I have to say on the Israeli side, just coming to terms with basically the horrors that have been inflicted for many years through the occupation. This is the only step towards pushing any kind of solution forward. And we have to sustain it, we have to do it every day, and we have to be responsible to ensure that it is done in a just and honest way. And for me personally, I'm kind of already cutting into the next question because we're already past 6, and I want to say that as someone who has the great honor of working with youth, with 20, 18, 25 sometime year old people who come to the movement and see a very different Israel to the Israel in which I grew up, but they come with all the determination, all the will to make it different, and make it different not just for their children, because again, I don't think we have time to wait till we pass a generation, but for their friends and for people they don't know, and they often air to us the frustration of being raised in a country that completely suppressed discussion around the occupation, that had no political education in schools, that doesn't talk about democracy in any meaningful way, in the way that Sally articulated very strongly. But the commitment of our youth activists and the fact that they are continuing to do what they do is the thing that gives me hope and keeps me working every day. So I think it's our commitment also to strengthen those who are speaking here and everyone else who is trying to fight this really intolerable solution, and to encourage this kind of discourse to live beyond moments of crises and to ensure that there's a better future, not within a couple of years, but more.
Thank you very much, Donna. I see that Ziad Abu Zayyad, co-editor and also founder of Palestine-Israel Journal, has joined us now. Ziad, I might give you the closing words after our discussion, since you were not able to join us earlier for welcoming words. But we have left, last but not least, Ayed Atmawi, who is program director at the Palestinian Peace Coalition, which is part of the Geneva Initiative. Now, the Geneva Initiative, I believe many are familiar with it. The Geneva Initiative very early came up with very concrete plans to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They stand like no other for the two-state solution. But as of recent, they have evolved and came up with designs for a confederation. It's very interesting, and they never stopped talking to each other. Please, Ayed, the two-state solution has been, has had a lot of criticism, especially in Palestine. People were very frustrated with Oslo, and that they have never seen a Palestinian state ever since. The settlements have been growing tremendously ever since Oslo, and there is so much disillusionment. What keeps you going, and what keeps you fighting for the two-state solution?
Thank you, Anis, and I'd like to thank also the moderators and also the organizers of this event. Honestly, I don't think that the problem with the people or between the people and the two-state solution as a formula for ending the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I think it's more of the fact that they have basically fed up with the current situation and the reality on the ground that undermines the two-state solution. So it's not the solution itself that is the problem. I believe that the reality on the ground is making it more complicated by time, and that's why you see that the two-state solution has been facing a lot of challenges and criticism. among the Palestinian, also the Israeli constituency. But let me begin first with the Palestinian Peace Coalition, with the Geneva Initiative. First of all, my name is Abed. I've been working for the Palestinian Peace Coalition for the past 11 years. I started in 2010, 2011. Currently, I'm, as you said, the program director, particularly running the Two-State Solution Coalition, which is a program that is funded. It's a 3-year program that is funded by the European Union. Currently, we have 24 Palestinian and Israeli civil society organizations who are basically peace-oriented, as in they work for peace, but particularly support the two-state solution publicly, and they endorse it, and they talk about it, and they try to promote it among Palestinian and Israeli constituencies. So the idea of this partnership with the European Union, with the EU, was to try and invest in the fact that we have people on both sides. We have individuals, and also we have institutions or organizations on both sides that are already working for peace and that are already specialized and focused on the two-state solution. And that's what we did. We basically, as I said, established this coalition, and I am running the program on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian Peace Coalition in general is, as I said, the Palestinian branch of the Geneva Initiative. The Geneva Initiative is a political initiative that was launched in 2003 by Palestinian officials and ex-officials, experts, civil society leaders, and was adopted, or was, let's say, supported at least by the late Yasser Arafat, late President Yasser Arafat. And since 2003, we have established, the Geneva Initiative have actually established two branches, as I said, one on the Palestinian side, where I work, the Palestinian Peace Coalition, and one on the Israeli side, that's called Hinuch Shalom, or Education for Peace, for short, like HLEP. Both organizations, well, maybe let me focus on my work, because we focus on the Palestinian side. We focus on working with the Palestinian institutions and the Palestinian young people, and also the Palestinian professionals, including media professionals, civil society leaders, local figures, religious leaders, etc., women leaders, and women rights activists, and trying basically to promote the two-state solution, trying to promote dialogue as the only way forward to end this conflict and to end this misery and this suffering on the Palestinian side. And eventually, at the end of the day, to basically establish a Palestinian state, or let's say to lay the foundations and to prepare the grounds for establishing an independent Palestinian state on the 1967 borders next to the state of Israel, as stipulated in the international resolutions that were basically issued in this regard. As I said, we focus on the two-state solution in the Palestinian Peace Coalition, but we are also focusing a lot on the reconciliation issue. We are trying to bring the Palestinian people together, trying to bring, or let's say to come up or to bring to the world one representation, one unified representation of the Palestinian people. We're trying to end the split between Gaza and the West Bank, to basically, again, also do our homework and prepare ourselves for regional and also international recognition of the state that we dream of establishing and seeing realized on the ground. We are trying to promote particularly debate, but we are also focused more on promoting debate among young Palestinians. 70% of our work on the Palestinian side goes to young Palestinians. We are trying to bring in Palestinian people from different backgrounds, ideological backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, political backgrounds, and we basically create debates, throw very controversial ideas to the table or on the table, and we try to, as much as possible, first of all, to raise their awareness, but also to build their capacity so that they become more capable, more effective, let's say more capable of basically creating the future that they dream of and that they that they want. There are a lot of challenges on the Palestinian side. I'm sure there are some challenges also on the Israeli side, but on the Palestinian side, we have a lot of challenges when it comes to creating this state, because if you want to create a state on the ground, then you should also create the system, the healthy system, the democratic system that we yearn for and that we really want to see established and strong and very much functional. The past 16 years, and this takes me to my article, or the main points that I've tried to discuss in my article. The main issue with the system is that we haven't had elections in the past 16 years. As I'm talking about parliamentary elections and also presidential elections. We haven't had this kind of political context that is supposed to basically bring in a new leadership that is more suitable for the current challenges and more capable and more equipped to handle the current situation, or let's say the new challenges that the current situation and the status quo keeps producing continuously. So in the 16 years, we haven't had this context. We were deprived from this context. And that is exactly why we don't see new faces on the Palestinian side. And again, circling back to the two-state solution and establishing a state, if you want to establish a state, then you have to have a very good and very healthy political system. But without elections, without these dealings, between Palestinians, you won't be able to establish this type of systems, let's say. One very important thing as well when it comes to the context is the fact that we hadn't had the chance to actually not only create new leaders, but also to put them to test. And what is better than an active context, an active political context that would actually create this leadership, and that would actually test this leadership, that would actually win credibility for this new leadership. And so you don't have a new leadership and you don't have the context that would create the leadership and actually test it and win it more credibility among the Palestinians. And so again, you see the same faces, you see the same way of doing things, the same styles of leadership, and so definitely the same results. And this takes me to the fact that Palestinian young people in particular are so fed up with the current situation. They don't want it to go on and to keep going like this. And so whenever, the moment that the president have actually announced elections, everyone went, I don't know how to say it, but everyone was very happy, so pleased with this announcement. Everyone started, or let's say the majority of people on the Palestinian side tried to register for elections, and we had hope that finally something is actually happening in spite of the many challenges that we are facing on the Palestinian side, particularly the young people. The lack of context was one of them, but then you also you can also talk about the various challenges that have been actually created by the context itself. The current context, the so not healthy context that we're living in. So there were, at the same time that there was a lot of hope that election is happening and that finally we are going to change something, there were also a lot of challenges that made it almost impossible for those who are following the news and those who are interested in knowing what's been published, not only the lines, but also, as we say, between the lines. One of them was the fact that, well, we don't know if that's a fact so far. It's not official. We haven't heard from the Israeli side, but everyone was saying that the Israeli side is going to definitely refuse holding elections in Jerusalem. So that was one of the main issues that actually made us feel, young Palestinians, that it might not actually work. So in spite of all the happiness that we felt when they announced elections, we also were concerned that the idea or the point or the issue of having elections in Jerusalem might actually be a huge obstacle, and we might actually not do anything when it comes to elections. The second thing is the demand, the so imbalanced demand of Hamas to actually recognize the quartet's conditions, or let's say to adhere to the quartet's condition. And we know that Hamas is very strong on the Palestinian side. We knew that right from the beginning, but apparently no one wants to listen. Hamas is very strong, and they represent a certain component of the, let's say, a certain percentage of the Palestinian constituency, and they won't actually let that go. Like they won't let go of this control or of this power that they have. And so to put such a demand on Hamas, we knew that Hamas won't be okay with this condition. And so we knew very well that it's not, let's say that this issue of Hamas recognizing the quartet's condition is going to be another obstacle, another stubborn, actually, obstacle. And we also had more concerns about the current leadership on the Palestinian side. And here we're not just talking about Fatah leadership or the PA leadership or just Hamas leadership, the Palestinian leadership in general, regardless. We had a lot of concerns that they are not going to accept the results of the elections because they might not like the outcomes, let's say, of the elections, and they might not like the amount of whatever it is, that they are gonna get as a result of the elections. So this was actually another concern. This was actually another problem for us that actually somehow was very disappointing. Just to think about it and to think that they won't accept it was very disappointing. And I remember back then that we have raised our, we tried to sound our voices, and we tried to say that maybe, just maybe, reconciliation is a priority if compared to elections, as if, I mean, that we maybe should have finalized this whole split between the West Bank and Gaza, between Fatah and Hamas, and then we go to elections. We wanted this. We wanted reconciliation before elections because we wanted very clear terms of reference where Hamas also and Fatah, will not be able to, just go back on or just, ignore. Also, the context, another component of the Palestinian local context is the new laws, this cyber crimes laws and this law and that law, and the fact that you can't actually criticize your leadership. You can't say this word, but it's fine if you say this, and then no, it's fine if you say this for you because you're Fatah. It's not fine to say the same thing because you're Hamas. So it's a mess on the Palestinian side because of these controversial laws that were passed. The last point is basically the first one. We circled back to the same point, which is we don't have a context. And even the context that available nowadays is so not healthy and so not encouraging, basically, for us Palestinian young people to get engaged or to get involved in the political life on the Palestinian side. These were the main, back then, these were the main issues that have actually made us feel that this whole election thing is not going to happen. Although, again, the majority of the Palestinian people were so happy and so excited for the announcement of election.
Thank you.
What gives me hope, maybe? Okay, it's fine if...
I want to cut you short because we have maybe some 10, 15 minutes left if we extend or push the time limit a little bit. Thank you very much for reminding us that obviously youth, both in Israel and in Palestine, have not only difficulties with the current reality because of the conflict, but also internal difficulties. Obviously, the cancellation of the Palestinian election was a huge setback. I believe we can all agree it has something to do with Israel. It has something to do with not being allowed to hold elections in East Jerusalem. But we can also agree that to a large extent, this was due to internal issues within the Fatah movement, that were some people close to the president that were not so keen on having elections. And I agree that Palestinian society was very excited. All the young people had never voted before in their lifetime. Actually, more than 90% of Palestinians registered for the elections. 36 lists registered for the elections. So there was quite some excitement. Obviously, if we had seen the elections, I don't believe we would have seen the violence that came later after the demonstrations in Jerusalem and the attacks by Hamas via rockets, etc. Obviously, in Israel, we have seen quite a year of protest almost against Netanyahu, whole coalition of especially young people demonstrating in Balfour. And we have a new government now that is made of various factions, and it will be really interesting to see how long they can hold up this government, and then also in what ways they will be at all able to react when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian concerns, because obviously their positions are so far from each other. However, we have asked those who are listening to us or following these discussions all over the world to submit questions, and I want to just try to pick up some of these. Now there's one question from Sajida, if I pronounce his name right, Rehman. She writes, I'm an Israeli Jew who went to Zion Square, Safra Square, and Sahel Square on the 22nd of April and the 10th of May, Jerusalem Day, and June 15th, to try to convince the flag wavers not to march to Damascus Gate. I remind you all, this was, the so-called flag march with Israeli flags trying to move through the Muslim quarter of the old city. Something that is being done usually on Jerusalem Day to celebrate the unification of Jerusalem, or the occupation, if you may, which is very provocative to the Palestinian side in East Jerusalem. And her question is, well, she states that the majority of the participants were actually under the age of 25. She was deeply saddened by that and by the hateful energy. And her question is, if there's any idea how you can communicate with these young Israelis that are far to the right. Maybe just raise your hand if you have an answer to this question.
I mean, I think just speaking on behalf of, someone who organized a counter protest. So Peace Now and Standing Together organized several weeks after violence broke off in Jerusalem. This is before the escalation, actually. And we organized a counter protest against political violence and against this discourse that we've seen escalating. And indeed, it would be naive to not acknowledge the rise of violent and nationalistic discourse on the Israeli right. I want to also respond to Hilal's helpful question underneath this question about how we in the Israeli peace camp intend to engage with the new government, which is obviously a very mixed bag for us. And it includes everything from the pro-human rights peace camp, and just to say that Mossi Raz and Gabi Lasky, both of whom were executive directors of Peace Now, are now sitting members of Knesset, which is a very, very big change for after the past few years. But of course, we still have a very large presence of pro-settler right. And the answer is that we will engage on our terms as we have always done. We will not move our agenda. It's not that we will appease a certain agenda because our partners are sitting in those governments. But certainly we have to acknowledge that there's space for discussion that hasn't been there before. And again, going back to the discussion about depoliticization of the Israeli youth and the fact that under Netanyahu, for the younger generation we're talking about now, there hasn't been a different possibility for government that is not led by Netanyahu. They cannot imagine anything else. They do not know anything else. My young cousins do not know what it's like to live under a different Israel. So the fact that there's been a change, it's not that we have suddenly woken up to a new democratic Israel. I don't think anyone is living in that illusion, but there's a space for conversation that hasn't been there before, that we fully endorse and we fully catalyze in our action. And just to generous women who try to go and speak and to say, how do we engage with these youth? I think what we try to do is to present a counter narrative and to be there in those spaces with signs that say no to violence, yes to human rights, yes to two-state solution, yes to empowering that kind of discourse. I think that is the only way to kind of ensure that the space has this counter narrative and that is available both for the young people but others who might be watching.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you also for picking up the question that Hillel wrote in the comment section. There is a question from Aya Shaver to Elias and again you, Donna. What does healing and transformation of youth practically look like? What sort of conversations and actions does this entail? Elias, please.
Yeah, so as I said, like the healing focus on our personal traumas and fear and what is the roots of that fear, where it comes from. So we organize a one-year retreat that involves Israeli and Palestinian together in a circles that we bring the spiritual leaders, psychologists, that they deal on a personal level, we do the personal questionnaire and we find out what is actually the motivator for fear and where it comes from and how can we face it. And we use a lot of the mindfulness and meditation techniques that make it connect with our, with ourself, with our mind, and how can we accept and get rid of these all bad thoughts and our traumas. And then we, through the circles, we invite religious leaders like a Jewish rabbi, Christian priest, and a Muslim sheikh that they can talk about the similarity and the common and the mutuality between these groups and our connection with this land. And we find out that we are not different. Actually, there is a lot of similarity between and we focus a lot about like the non-violence, acceptance. We do a lot of like gathering around. So we do not do like these typical meetings, Israeli-Palestinian meetings, just to come for the purpose of meeting in a 5-star hotel to spend a few days to get to know each other and go. We actually put them in a space where they can face and challenge their fear and themselves. They can just go dig deep into a deeper layer that no one is actually talking about, which is hatred and fear from each other. So it's actually a one-year program that we organize with our partners in Israel. We have an Israeli organization that they recruit the Israelis, and it's very, very successful. And I can see like we succeeded to create a core group of Israeli and Palestinian that they have one vision now that they can carry it and influence their communities. Yes.
Thank you very much, Elias. I don't see any other questions. I think this has been an interesting.
Can I just respond to the question? Was also referred
yes,
to about
yes. I was gonna give you the word, Donna.
Right.
Please.
Just to say that piece now. We don't really use the language of healing, but we do think about transformation a lot, and we think about how to galvanize and create the space for change. And thinking about it's a really, really deep and helpful question. Thank you for that. The way that we engage is taking young people to see reality that might be hidden from them, taking them to tours to see settlements and what the reality is there for people on both sides of the border, for settlers who are living with immense army and police guardianship next to Palestinian villages that can be moved at the space of a day with no warning and with no reasoning given to them. Taking young people along with us to protests in Sheikh Jarrah, in Silwan, 2 places we've been advocating for a very long time, where again, seeing reality and being just exposed to a dialogue with Palestinians, which is something that has been said before, Israeli youth that has been living under this current regime hasn't been exposed to in a very long time. So I think just exposing to the true facts that are happening, that are being disguised from not only young people, but really everyone who's following certain narratives, and allowing the facts to speak for themselves, which I think is always a good place to start transformation.
Thank you, Donna. I want to give Ayat maybe the floor, who reminded me that there was a question whether this was a religious or a land issue. Since Elias has been talking about also the connection to faith and the needs of different faith communities, Ayat, please maybe a few words to this subject, and then afterwards I would like to close giving the word to Ziad. So we're already over time. Keep it short, please.
It won't take time. Just two very important points when it comes to, is it a political or religious conflict? Trust me, it's always better if it's political conflict. If it's religious, it's way more complicated. But the situation on the Palestinian side, in the Palestinian-Israeli context, suggests the exact opposite. The whole thing started with a biblical, biblical promise, and then you also move to the nation state bill. I mean, we can talk a lot about this. We can talk about it in details, but these two things, these two main things have actually made it more of a religious conflict. And trust me, we really do not want it to be like that. And we really hope it won't be seen and dealt with as such. Jews this, Jews that, Christian this, Christian that, etc., etc. That's very dangerous, and we know how dangerous it is, and we don't want it. Hopefully it will, hopefully it's going to stay a political one, or we will be focusing on it from a political perspective and angle instead of the religious one, because that is very dangerous, especially in this spot, in this location of the Middle East, or in this place in the world in general. So thank you.
Thank you, Ayad, very much. I believe maybe we can agree on that it's an issue of identities, and the fear of losing that identity, or having that identity being attacked by the other. And I guess any solution would have to take this into consideration, that everyone who lives between the river and the sea has the opportunity to uphold his and her identity in whatever solution there will be. Now, as I said, I would like to give Ziad Abu Zayed, co-editor and also founder of the Palestine-Israel Journal, the word maybe as closing remarks for today. I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience. The idea of this was really to be more of a platform for young activists to express themselves, present themselves and their work and the organizations they stand for. And I hope that everyone will take away from this, maybe Google the panelists, maybe Google their organizations, follow up. Maybe you heard an idea that you haven't heard before, or something you take away from this today. Ziad, please, for some closing words, I'll give you the floor. Further.
Thank you, Hannes. And first of all, I want to apologize that I could not be with you from the very beginning, because I had some unexpected thing in the family. My son was ill and I had to accompany him to the hospital. So that's why, and I thought I may be able to come back earlier, but I could not. So I apologize to all of you about my absence from the beginning of this program. My other thing, I want to thank FIS, because they have been for a long time partners of the Palestine-Israel Journal, and they were funding our activities and supporting us. And because of their generous support, we were able to come out with this issue, which I believe is a very important issue, because it touches on a very important sector of the society on Palestine and Israel, and we tried to give an international dimension to the issue. And we are very happy that we had very prominent young writers to the issue. And I would allow myself to say that I was surprised that the number of the Palestinians who contributed articles to this issue was much, much more than the number of the Israelis. In the beginning, I was afraid that I will not have enough Palestinian writers, but I was surprised to find a surplus of writers, and that's why we had to make it a double issue. Usually our normal issue is 128 pages, but when we had a very good material, so we thought to make it a double issue simply because we had that very, very good contributions from Israelis and Palestinians. Having said this, I just want to make a very short comment about the last question, which Hannes asked, or not Hannes, one of the audience asked, whether it is a religious conflict or a land conflict. It's not really a political conflict, as Aid said. And I would tell you that Aid name, it means Aid is returning. And Haqq al-Awda is the right of return. So Aid, you are Aid and you will return. The core of the conflict is the land. And the main target and aim of the Zionist movement was to come to Palestine and to grab the land and to take more and more land. And this is what we call Nakba. And we say that this Nakba did not stop in 1948, but is still continuing on because the Israeli fascists are not satisfied with what they had in 48. They are trying to take parts of the West Bank. They want to annex Area C. Even if you see what's happening in Jerusalem, taking Palestinian families from their houses in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and Batn al-Hawa and throwing out and bringing Jewish families to settle in the houses of the Palestinians, it shows you that the core of the conflict is land. Now, some Jews try to make it a religious conflict and say that Islam hate us, and from the days of Muhammad, they were against the Jews and attacking the Jews, but this is not true. This is not true. We are a people who were living in their country, and all of a sudden, new immigrants came here and were settling in our country and took major part of our country in 48, and then took the remaining part in 67, and they are not satisfied. They don't say that this is an occupied land. You see that these people are not even saying occupied land. They consider it land of Israel, greater land of Israel. So the conflict is not religious, and it's ridiculous to see that there is someone who says about himself that he is a Jew, but he is a secular. He is not religious. And Judaism, it's in its roots. It's a religion which was exploited by the Zionist movement and converting this religion to a nationalism. And I cannot understand how a Russian who had no relation with the Jews who were living here at the time of Abraham and Moses and Yitzhak and others, how he had the right to come here, settle here, take my land, take my house, and I am the one who is living here thousands of years, I don't have the right in this land. There's nothing which justify that you are a Jew, you have all the rights to come here. Even if you are a Christian living in India and you convert to Judaism, you come here, you have the right. And it's the land of your fathers and grandfathers. How can this be explained? And to obtain the adjective of being a Jew is not through the Ministry of Interior in Israel, but it's through the rabbis. You go to the rabbi, you make giyur, you go through all this religious treatment, and then you become a Jew. And then you say, I am a secular Jew. I don't believe in God. How come? How come you use the religion to become a Jew, and then you kick the religion away, and you say, I am secular, but I am a nationalist? So I'm sorry to take the discussion to this point, but let's go back and say our conflict here is conflict of land. We are a people under military occupation. We are struggling against the occupation, which is trying to bring its population and settle them in our occupied land in violation, severe violation of Geneva Fourth Convention and all the related resolutions of the Security Council, of the General Assembly, and of the international community. To end, thank you, Hannes, for your patience. Thank you very much, and thanks you all if I offended any of you, but this is the reality how we see it. I hope to see you again in another more pleasant event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ziad. Let me remind you also that because you believe that it needs a coalition between Israel and Palestinians to overcome the situation, you have ever since decades upheld this journal on the basis of Jewish and Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian advocates working side by side and sticking to a dialogue. In this spirit, thank you very much to every one of you, and I hope I'll see you in one of our next discussions. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to you all.
Thank you.